This is a movie where the turtles were almost aliens, Shredder was almost whitewashed, and April is definitely a sex object. It's a Michael Bay movie without Michael Bay's panache. Get ready for our review of the 2014 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Surveillance is showing heavy Foot Clan activity.
They're taking hostages.
Let's rock and roll.
This is our city. That's what I'm talking about. Like shadows in the night, completely unseen.
Who's that? It's a camera flash.
Give me the camera. Oh, look, he's doing his Batman voice.
Back off, Rat. Do not say a word about this to anyone. If you do, we will find you.
Yeah, we'll find you. I'm sorry, that came across super creepy, okay? That's...
This is the Superhero Pantheon. On this podcast, we take one superhero film a week and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the pile of shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through The Real World. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing. Specifically, go back and listen to our 2 episodes, Kevin Ford and myself. We have reviewed the first 2 seasons of Veronica Mars. Definitely check that out. And I was trying to find ways to connect any of the Turtle movies to Veronica Mars, and I couldn't do it. Also, if you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you could do so in 2 ways. First, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, find us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. Brian, I have a question for you. As I was sending DMs to you with my observations on TMNT 2014, what were you thinking to yourself?
God, this is going to be worse than I originally remembered. Because I remember going to the theater and just having low expectations and knowing it's a Michael Bay production. And hey, look, I'm a Michael Bay fan. Like, I like the first Transformers. I like the third Transformers. God forbid I like Armageddon for how bad it is. But you just expect certain things from a Michael Bay movie, and this was far worse than I imagined. And the second time around, it's even worse, because apparently I blocked so much of this movie out of my head that I completely forgot Whoopi Goldberg's in this movie for 2 scenes. So there you go.
She is in this movie for 2 scenes, and we will get to that in just a few minutes. Of course, this is a reboot of the entire franchise. There is no continuity between this movie and the previous movies. This is the first TMNT film to be produced and released by Paramount Pictures and Nickelodeon. Of course, Nickelodeon had started airing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles TV series a couple years prior, and let's be honest, that show is significantly better than this movie, so please do not watch this. Go watch the TV show on Hulu, where it is streaming. It's so much better. There was a lot of controversy about this film, Brian. I don't know if you remember some of this, but this film was originally going to be called The Ninja Turtles, with Teenage Mutant part completely deleted, but there was so much negative feedback that they ultimately decided to put that back in. This is also because an early draft of the script had the Turtles be aliens from Dimension X, Shredder be an alien who grows spikes, and some sort of a breakout and escape at a mountainside foot base. The screenplay received a huge backlash from fans and was discarded. There was even a point when April had the line, "Aliens, no, that's stupid," referencing the early screenplay.
I totally remember that, and I thought it was just ridiculous. I mean, the title thing is fine. Like, I mean, it's a shortened title. It's better for marketing, you know, because it's a lot of words to put up there in a main title. And it's just weird because, like, I don't know, man, because even if they were aliens or not, I get the backlash, but either way, it doesn't really matter. I don't know. I guess people just love that origin story of the ooze, even though I think the ooze is from outer space anyway. If you think about it, I don't know. It's just weird because it's just so overprotective over some nonsense. But it would have freshened things up. You know what I mean? At least it would have made sense. It would have been like a rocket raccoon kind of situation where it's like, why is this raccoon talking? Oh, he's actually an alien. Kind of makes sense, but because we don't even know officially how the ooze got created anyway in the original movies. I mean, we know it was created by scientists, but God knows where it actually came from. So it's probably alien substance anyway.
One of the reasons that this did not go through, that the alien concept did not go through, is co-creator Kevin Eastman seemed to put the kibosh on that. I think he's kind of been a mixed bag as far as influencing this franchise, but I am so grateful that this did not happen because, my goodness, what a terrible, terrible idea. Bebop and Rocksteady were originally supposed to appear in this first movie to fight the Turtles. They were going to be martial arts soldiers that were given mutagen and turned into monster super soldier mutants for the Turtles to fight. They were written out with the intent of appearing in the second movie, which is Out of the Shadows, which we will be discussing next week. And apparently everybody in this movie just has to be super. Shredder basically looks like the Super Shredder. The Turtles are 7 feet tall. There's a lot of steroids in this movie, I would say.
Yeah, everyone's way too jacked up, and it just kind of makes it so emotionally detached a little bit. It's like you can't really relate to these people. You know, at least with the original movies, you can relate to them because, you know, there's like that, you know, human element to them. There's no human element here at all, especially with the CGI and you're taking away the suits. And that was the other thing too that really pissed me off when I heard it was going to be CGI because I thought, well, they're spending all this money. You know what I mean? They just I think around this time the Muppets movie was like coming had like a little bit of a comeback in the mid 2010s. So I was like, maybe they can just do the suits. And then when I saw the footage and stuff like that, I was just like, well, my expectations are out the window. So just all that combined, it just, you know, it didn't add up to a good recipe, but whatever. I had low expectations anyway.
So, of all the things that I read about this movie, I find this to be the most preposterous. Apparently, the VFX team incorporated the facial features of various actors into the mutants' appearances. Leonardo's face was based on Tom Hanks and Russell Crowe. Raphael's face was based on Russell Crowe and Clint Eastwood. Donatello's face was based on Leonard Nimoy. Michelangelo's face was based on comedian Bill Murray. Splinter's face was based on Japanese actor Toshihiro Mifune, who had played various samurai in his career. Now, I am not familiar with the Japanese actor nearly as much as far as his look goes, but I find the idea of the Turtles being based off of these actors and the designs and the looks to be absolutely preposterous.
Especially since they're wearing masks and you can't even tell anyway, right? Like, that's the whole point of the mask, is to make them not look distinguishable because they're wearing masks so they can kind of be in the shadows, right? But why do you make them this so detailed if you can't even see their face anyway? So, and they never take off the mask in the movie anyway, maybe once or twice. You know, not even all of them. So, they went through all that effort for nothing, I thought, and they're just way overthinking it and whatever. It should have been suits again.
I have a feeling we have a running theme. In this movie, the Shredder says, "Tonight I dine on turtle soup," his trademark line from the 1987 Turtle series, which the context of which is kind of absurd. Whoopi Goldberg is in this movie, and she did it because her daughter was a huge fan and was a fan of some of the other movies, and when she heard about this new project, she wanted to get involved, so she did, and she would play April O'Neil's boss, and the nicest thing that can be said is that there is an Academy Award-winning actress in this movie.
Yeah, and I love Sister Act as a kid, so this might be the only time in the podcast ever where we can talk about Sister Act 1 and 2. Bigger fan of the first, Harvey Keitel. Second one had Lauryn Hill. Yeah, Lauryn Hill's in the second one. So, yeah, you know, shout out to those two movies from the 90s, but just so fucking random. I was just blown away because I was in the theater, I was just like, Whoopi Goldberg's in this movie? And then she completely disappears. So, you know, what a waste of time, but you got a paycheck, and everyone was just getting paychecks in this movie anyway, so good for her.
There'll be a question about that later. Vernon, played by Will Arnett. We have discussed Will Arnett a number of times over the course of the last few weeks as he played Batman and Slade in two different Warner Brothers animated features, and I guess kind of my rule with Will Arnett is if he is doing a voiceover of some sort, I am generally for it, and I like the project. See those movies that we just mentioned, as well as BoJack Horseman. Then, when it comes to live action, not so great. See his Netflix sitcom, as well as these two movies. There is a point in which he is making a sandwich with only mustard and cheese in his apartment while listening to the George Michael song Careless Whisper. This was a nod to Arnett's character Job Bluth on the series Arrested Development, where he makes the same sandwich and has a nephew named George Michael.
He was the only silver lining of this movie. For both movies, he seems like he's in a completely different movie than everyone else. It seems like in this movie he's in a romantic comedy with Megan Fox that just goes nowhere, and at least he made those scenes entertaining for slightly, entertaining at least. But hey, man, just a coincidence, you know what I mean? That we went from Teen Titans to the Turtles, and somehow Will Arnett just crosses over into both. And he was in the Summer of Batman as well, so it just feels like this is like peak Will Arnett for us, and it might not get any better than this.
It likely will not, and this is the first TMNT live-action film to feature the Shredder's Lieutenant Karai, and if you can believe it, Brian, she has even less to do in this movie than she did in TMNT last week.
Yeah, it's a good thing she had a background in this movie, right?
She had a background, you say?
Yeah, I'm being sarcastic. There was none. There was absolutely no background. She was just there, and I don't even think they mentioned her name, like once or twice, and then that was it. And then she's just there.
Absolutely. Let's get to. There are a number of homages to the 1990 movie. There are a number of scenes that are very similar in theory, at least, but in practice, not so much. I don't necessarily want to get into a lot of the details, but I will point out that this is yet another Turtle movie where the climax takes place on a rooftop, and that is certainly worth pointing out. We have Splinter recounting the Turtles' history to April. We have Leonardo dicing a pizza in midair and a slice falling onto Splinter's head. So, are they trying to honor that movie, or are they trying to, it seems like they want to have the cake and eat it too, in this case.
Yeah, that's the vibe I was getting. It's like they want to satisfy the old fans and then, satisfy the new kiddies, right? But, again, Pizza Hut in the promotional instead of Domino's like the original. And again, they're throwing the pizza around like a goddamn frisbee, and there's no way that's going to last. It would be just, smushed, and cheese flying everywhere in the box, and yet it's perfect when you open it. So it's just, again, the pizza dynamics in these movies are not accurate.
I mean, that doesn't really bother me. If you're going to do a cartoon, then do a cartoon. That's fine. I genuinely do not have a problem with that. There's so much other stuff to complain about that I think that stuff just kind of gets magnified. And I think the very poor CGI and the fact that this movie looks very cheap, I think is what hurts it so much. And I think it says a lot that the Turtles do not make a full appearance until 20 minutes into this movie. And this movie is about an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah, that was the other thing too. It's just like they wanted to do this animated style and then contrast it with this live action Michael Bay style that it goes too fast. And I know it works for Transformers, but they took the time to do the really good CGI for Transformers. And I don't know if that was the Lord of the Rings group that I don't know if it was I think it is Weta that did Transformers. I don't know if Weta did these, but I know Weta is like top notch because they did the Lord of the Rings stuff in 2002, and the stuff in 2002 Lord of the Rings looks way better there than the CGI we got in 2014 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, man. I don't know how that works out. I don't know if they just rushed it, because if you look at the rendering, I know we're going ahead on the tech stuff, but it's just so bothersome. But if you look at the rendering on Splinter, it looks like they didn't finish it. It looks like it was incomplete, and they just left a lot of hairs just missing, and his skin tone just totally blotchy and stuff like that. It didn't look natural at all. Even the Turtles as well. So I don't know what they were doing. They probably rushed it, knowing Michael Bay and the way he likes to move, and oh, we got to get this done, and then we got to get another sequel out there as soon as possible. So it just felt like this was rushed, and it's a reflection of that with the CGI.
I mean, the fact that they announced a sequel 2 days after the first movie came out, because this movie, for all the crap that we are giving it, was very financially successful, making nearly $500 million at the worldwide box office, and proving to be a monumental success as far as these kinds of movies. The fact that it was a reboot, the fact that the reviews for this movie were not very good, there was still enough nostalgia to get people to come out. And as we get into the categories, I think the biggest problem is that these four turtles are steroid CGI monsters who look downright scary and not appropriate for kids. And, you know, the animated movie or the animated show, the turtles were 3 and 4 feet tall. And from a logistical standpoint, I think that would have been really difficult to pull off for live action. So I understand when you're creating the suits, having suits for people that are 6 feet tall. I totally understand that. But I think the problem here is that the turtles just look too intimidating, and that there's a likability factor that is just totally lost with the design of the turtles, with the fact that they're steroid monsters, and the fact that they treat April like garbage in this movie for the most part. Michelangelo especially is a total creep. There's a point when Leonardo basically threatens her. And, I mean, I think the fundamental issue is that even though the Turtles are kind of goofy in the first three movies, I never was like, well, I hate these Turtles. In this movie, I was like, these Turtles are dicks.
Yeah, that's the big thing missing is like there's no fun with these guys, man. Like it's just like they designed them to look badass and like, you know, kick-ass fighters and like the steroid thing and like let's make them look like, you know, giant anime characters in real life and, you know, put extra muscles here and there and that kind of thing and it looked weird and they weren't even proportionally like equal and like Michelangelo looked really slimmer than all the other ones and Raphael looked like totally jacked and his shoulders looked way too jacked. I don't know, it was crazy and the design concept was just way off and like the likability factors out the window. And I think the other thing missing too is like the facial expressions, like we talked about that and the original, 1 and 2, especially about how they got the puppets right for the facial expressions and the talking mouths and stuff like that. Just something was missing here, like the lack of like human emotion. I know they're not humans, but you need that human emotion to connect with them, so you get that emotion, connectivity right there, and it doesn't happen. It never happens. I think the closest you get is in the second one with Leonardo, but that's because Johnny Knoxville was the voice of Leonardo in here, and it just sucked, man. He just does not fit a Ninja Turtle. When I hear him, I just want to just think of Jackass. I know that's typecasting, but you did Jackass for so long, and you did the fucking Dukes of Hazzard movie. Dude, it just doesn't work, and I'm glad they dropped him from. Or I don't know if he just quit or didn't want to do the second movie, but I'm glad that he wasn't in the second movie. But man, he is the worst Leonardo. Michelangelo is just so annoying, and yeah, he's just like a horny kid just for April O'Neil, and it's far worse than it was in the original trilogy. And April O'Neil just looks like a crazy person in this movie until everyone starts believing her. But the way she's acting, it doesn't fit the feel of the movie, and like I don't know, there's just weird stuff going on in the background. And Will Arnett, like we said before, is just like a totally different romantic comedy.
I think we have to talk about April because I think the way that Megan Fox is treated in this movie is pretty horrifying. And I want to make it very clear that I don't think that she was the right person to cast for this role. I don't necessarily think she is the type of person that can carry a movie, but I have to put that aside when I'm talking about the way that she is totally objectified by the camera in this movie. It's very male gazy. The fact that Vern is consistently hitting on her throughout this movie, I think is pretty offensive. And there's a scene toward the climax when there is just a blatant shot of her butt in a car. And I'm thinking to myself, this is an important action scene in the movie. An action scene that is borderline incomprehensible for all the reasons that you've talked about when it comes to the CGI. But I think the way that she is objectified, the way that her character is treated, I think that one of the problems with so many of these reboots, and I feel very similarly about Jurassic World as well, is that the characters are dumber. I think that's the problem with this movie, is the characters are all dumb. even though April has discovered this, she's still behaving in a very stupid way. The Turtles are behaving very stupidly. Splinter is behaving very stupidly. And when you have a lot of stupid people on screen, my instinct is to just tune it out and not be interested. And ultimately, I think Will Arnett comes the closest to not looking incompetent, because I think he kind of takes the Bill Murray approach of almost distancing himself from the material, and that's why this movie is not a complete failure. But I really do have a problem with April and the way that she is objectified. Because again, even though this is PG-13, this is specifically designed to be a kids movie, because Nickelodeon branding is all over the place. And even though there have been some issues with objectification in the MCU, it is not nearly as bad as this movie, and it's pretty awful. And for all those reasons, I am giving a 2 for the heroes in TMNT 2014.
Yeah, I'm going with a 1, and it's nothing against Megan Fox. Like, I really like her in Jennifer's Body. I think that's a really underrated horror movie, and I thought she was like borderline almost great in that towards the end of it. So I don't think it's like she's got a lack of talent, because I even like her in the first Transformers movie. I thought she was way better in the first Transformers movie. She was actually funny in that one. When they tried to do comedy with her in this one, it's just totally disconnected, and it's just, yeah, the male gazy thing. Also, Tony Shalhoub as Splinter, man, just totally off the mark on the casting. And look, I like Monk, and I like Tony Shalhoub, and I like him on, I think he was on Wings. Yeah, he was on Wings. He's great on Wings. So, just totally miscast. And is it whitewashing? I'm not sure, because he's a rat, but at the same time, it's like, they put Mako as the voice in 2007, and you go from Mako to Tony Shalhoub. Kind of questionable, and I don't know if that was a Nickelodeon decision to try to just get like, hey, let's put a comedy guy in there, make Splinter funny. It just totally fucked it up completely. So I'm going to the 1 all around.
Wow. Speaking of whitewashing, let's talk about Shredder. It was supposed to be William Fichtner. He was supposed to be the Shredder. Sax, the character that he plays, was very clearly supposed to be that. But they decided at the last minute to have a different actor, an actor of Asian descent, playing this character. The Foot Clan are pretty much useless, as usual. I think they're actually more useless because they don't get any sort of character development whatsoever. There aren't even the scenes, like at least in the first Turtle movie, you got some scenes with them training, with some of their awful behavior with stealing. Like, the Foot Clan at least had something to do in the first part of the movie when they're terrorizing New York with their crime spree. You get none of that in this movie. In fact, what they really are is they're more of a military group, and that is very typical for Michael Bay, but it doesn't really work in the Turtle movie. And Shredder goes full Super Shredder from the first scene and basically beats the hell out of Splinter about 45 minutes in. And this is yet another Turtle movie where we get a Splinter death tease.
I can't believe they destroyed all the mystique that Shredder had. That darkness, that broodiness, that, like not seeing his face too much right at the start. Here it's just like he's just a cartoon. And they just give him like these knives, and he's got this giant metal thing. He looks like a transformer by the end. And that really just rubbed me the wrong way. Just like, God, they just fucked it up so bad. And then the fact that his henchman was clearly a bad guy, right? And just the way that they framed it. And it's like his whole plan their plan is to create a disease and then create an antidote and then sell the antidote to the world to get rich. But the problem is that dude is already really rich, like a billionaire. So his plan is just to get even richer? Like, that makes no sense.
I would disagree with you on that one, Brian. I think it makes total sense for a billionaire to be greedy and want more money. So I'm going to respectfully disagree with you on that one.
I thought that was just completely... If you want to just say it outright, just, say you want to kill people and not just, because that was what Shredder wanted. I get that, but goddamn, this other dude was just like, we got to create an antidote, but what's the disease? You know what I mean? It's like, it was just weird. And then the whole idea of them creating the Turtles, I don't know. That rubbed me the wrong way too. And just the performances were just so generic. And I don't know. I thought that dude did so much better in the 2 minutes he had in The Dark Knight than he was in this movie. So there you go. 1 all around for me again.
Wow, you are again lower than me. I am giving this a 2, and I think a lot of that is because there's at least one decent scene with the Shredder, and I don't think they totally ruin his mystique, but I think you're right that this is definitely not good. I mean, the difference between a 2 and a 1 is minimal, and I was definitely and wholly unimpressed with how this goes. Let's talk about the story. April is an incompetent reporter doing awful stories, and this is the kind of thing that we see in so many of these movies, where you have this person who wants to be a do-gooder journalist doing these kinds of stories, and I don't necessarily know what this is supposed to represent, because, again, it's been something that's been done to death. The turtles appear and scare the holy crap out of April. Michelangelo, especially, is a total creep towards her. Can you believe there was a boner reference in this movie, Brian?
Yeah, it's just it's that Michael Bay influence, man. So there you go.
It certainly was that, and just like every other generic superhero movie, the plot involves sending a toxin into the city, and this is not a trope that we have talked about, but I think we actually do need to talk about it right now. The trope is, how many superhero movies have taken place on the rooftop of a major tower in New York City? Because we've got at least one Fantastic Four movie that's done it. The Avengers has done it multiple times. And, of course, we have this movie, too.
I haven't seen Daredevil in forever, but we're going to review that probably early next year. But I could recall, did that end on a rooftop as well?
I think it ended in a penthouse.
Okay, well, for me, with the turtles on a rooftop, that makes sense because to me, that's kind of like this ode to the original, where the rooftops of New York were kind of this thing. But I get you on this trope. I just find it weird that this was more of like a ripoff than to Batman Begins. I don't know if you picked up on that, but like the whole toxin and the contaminating thing, the antidote, the whole fucking like going to the docks at the beginning of the movie and never seeing the turtles, even though they were kicking ass. That was just like, it felt like a straight ripoff of Batman Begins. That's what really annoyed me. And like they were going for this Dark Knight, Batman Begins kind of tone. And it just, you don't do that with the turtles, man. Yeah, the first one was gritty, the original, but not like a Dark Knight type of thing with the lighting. So, man, they just, again, just missed the tone of this, and I just hated the story. So, I don't know how you feel about the story in general, but man, like, this was just poorly put together.
It is very poorly put together, and I think just getting into some of the details, I think there are just a lot of really bad little moments, and again, I just have a real problem with how they treated April, because, I mean, they didn't treat April great in TMNT 3 that we talked about with some of the time traveling, but it's so much better than even this, because at least April was involved in some of the action, and admittedly, Megan Fox was pregnant about 2 weeks into this movie, so I do understand why maybe she wasn't as involved, but you did not have to write her as stupidly as the writers treated her, and I think that is a real problem with this movie, and for all of those reasons, I'm also giving this a 2.
Yeah, I'm giving it a 1 because I was just so frustrated, and I hate the way that they did the backstory with guess who names the turtles, everybody? April O'Neil as a child who doesn't remember naming the turtles or has no memory of the turtles whatsoever. All of a sudden her memory just goes. Like, that makes no sense. They made no reference to her memory going away and then all of a sudden it coming back because she just sees these random turtles all of a sudden. Like, I know these turtles, blah, 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 and I named them. So, just so lame all around. And the fact that they learned Kung Fu from a book that was thrown in the sewer.
That is cultural appropriation right there at its finest.
Yeah, man, like, what the hell? At least that, like, in the original, like, Splinter was watching his master and, doing the moves. Like, that's an actual, like, teacher-student kind of thing. Here, he read it from a book. And he just learned to read, apparently, because I don't know how. Like, I don't know. But I thought that was just too ridiculous. And the fact that he also taught the turtles as well, based on reading a book, just ridiculous.
It is definitely not a positive aspect to this. I mean, I think that there is just a total disrespect for the culture. And look, I know that we're talking about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but the fact of the matter is that I think that those first 3 movies at least paid a baseline of respect. I mean, this is even worse than TMNT 3, which I certainly think had its own racial problems. But the fact that they clearly wanted to whitewash the Shredder, the fact that they basically whitewashed the Splinter, I think speaks to that. And when we talk about the technical aspects of this movie, I feel like this looks like a low-rent Michael Bay production with terrible CGI. The lighting of this movie seems consistently off in every scene because I think they're going for the Michael Bay look. And for all the problems that I have with Michael Bay, I think his movies genuinely look interesting most of the time, but in this case, it just did not. I think the movie looked really dark at a lot of points, and the score was just generic, and that's why I'm giving this a 2.
Yeah, I hated the score. I hated the CGI, as I've already mentioned. There was just a wasteful 15-minute scene going down a snowy mountainside that was just pointless, and that looked horrible as well because it just looked like a bad animated movie mixed with like live action. So on top of that, plus you mentioned the lighting issues that I also have as well. And just some of the colors are just kind of off a little bit, especially when you look at the turtles and the green on their skin doesn't pop. It should be popping a little bit. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be too muted down. And all that kind of thing. Oh, and then the other thing that I really hated is the fact that they're going in the sewer and sliding down like the water and using their shell to do that, and everything's just going way too fast. And the camera's going way too fast, and everything is just going way too fast. And I thought the editing was way too fast in the action sequences because you can just not follow what's going on some of the action. So overall, I'm giving this a 1. It's probably one of the lowest tech scores I've ever given on a movie, but this was just horrible. And I've given 1s on every single category so far.
I think it's amazing that despite the fact that I hate this movie, you are really putting forth an effort to make it clear you hate this movie even more than I do. And that I have to show my mad respect for that.
Thank you. And I never thought, I mean, still, like, you have this rule where you can give zeros, and I get that. I just kind of have this baseline rule. I just can't, it doesn't feel right giving a 0. At least a 1 is some kind of effort, so they did give effort. I'll give it that, but it's just the wrong kind of intention, and everything behind it was just wrong.
All right, let's get to the legacy of this movie. I think the fact of the matter is that this movie made a decent amount of money and spawned a sequel. But I think that these two movies, even though we're 3 to 5 years later, I think they've mostly been forgotten. What I would like to know is, I think as adults, I think we could say they're easily disposable. I'd like to know if children actually enjoy these movies and get something out of it, because obviously you and I, Brian, have a clear nostalgia for the 1990 movie. For God's sakes, it almost went into our superhero pantheon. I would love to know if kids are rewatching this movie like we rewatched the 1990 movie. Because it's really hard for me to assess the legacy without knowing that, because these ultimately are kids' movies.
See, I'm not sure because I feel like kids love the show more and are not really connected to these movies. It just kind of feels that way. And I know Nickelodeon, they really advertise on their channel, and I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just a Nickelodeon thing, but like it seems whenever Nickelodeon produces a movie, it doesn't really hit the mark. Like I know people were kind of like back in 2002 when they announced the Hey Arnold movie. I know there was like some high expectations because the Rugrats movie was actually pretty decent, right? But that just kind of fell short of expectations because I think a lot of people have high expectations at Hey Arnold. So what I'm kind of saying is like Nickelodeon has this, not so high track record. So maybe they just didn't care enough to produce a higher quality movie, and they just didn't care because they knew kids were just going to watch it anyway. But it feels like kids like the show more because I don't know, like a lot of the reviews and stuff that I see online and the response and the higher rated stuff has been the 2012 show that ended 2 years ago. So I don't know. I think that's probably going to have the bigger legacy with kids than the movies.
Certainly, I can see that. My score for the legacy is a 4.
This is going to be the highest score for me, obviously. It's a 3, and that's only because of the money it made and the fact that like it got me to go to the theater, and even with my low expectations, like it was a full house that night, and it was a big opening weekend, and it did really well, bigger than my expectations. So I just thought maybe, well, that's just kind of the current generation. It's like the Michael Bay kind of generation of movie going. So it is what it is. So my total score is a 7. What was your total?
My total score is a 12, and this indeed will be the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie to go into the pile of shame. We have not put a movie into the pile of shame in quite some time, so this is kind of a big deal, and it's really not going to get any better next week, but quite frankly, this movie is not very good, and it was just a very frustrating watch because I think we've seen one really good Turtle movie, and we've sort of been getting diminishing returns with each progressive Turtle movie, whereas I think last week's TMNT was kind of boring. I think they at least took the characters seriously. This movie doesn't even do that. It doesn't take things seriously. It is actually somehow more racist than TMNT 3, and it completely disrespects almost every character.
Yeah, and listen, I think it actually slightly gets better next week with the sequel, but not by a lot, maybe like a point or two. But that's probably because of Johnny Knoxville's not in it. So there you go.
All right, let's get to the burning questions here as we need to get out of here because there really, quite frankly, is not a lot to say about this. What movie is Will Arnett in?
So I figured that he's kind of in this romantic comedy about a camera guy who's in love with his news reporter, but he's probably slightly too older for her, and she really doesn't give a shit about him. But we kind of see how it goes, and then all of a sudden there's like science fiction at the end.
He's in like season 3.5 of Arrested Development, I feel like. That's kind of how the impression that I'm getting, and funny enough, in Arrested Development, he kind of does the same thing with a younger female and with the male as well. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on. How gross is the male gazy stuff with Megan Fox in hindsight?
Yeah, there's it's bad, and I think a recent article came out like a couple weeks ago about how she kind of regrets being sexualized in Hollywood, and yeah, I mean it's just kind of the way shit happened, and I wish she had more control over it, but things are changing now, especially in this Me Too movement era. So hopefully there's more eyes on the set and more control over those kind of things, and just people putting a kibosh on these really exploitative shots here and there, and especially in a PG movie. I thought that was just way too, God, that's too much for a PG movie with the way they did that ass shot. So,
Did Vince McMahon book this movie?
no, because Roman Reigns was not booked to look strong in this movie, so unfortunately, it did not meet Vince McMahon standards.
There was no cucking, which has been a big deal lately. So I have to say that, based on that alone, that he could not have booked this movie. But it certainly could have felt like it at some point. What did Whoopi Goldberg do with her paycheck from this movie?
I think she probably got some nice dresses and maybe a new pair of sunglasses and maybe some gifts for her friends on the set of The View. I don't know if she's on the View or what's that show? The View? I think it's The View. I don't know.
Yes, it's The View. I'm sure she got gifts for everyone except Meghan McCain.
Ha! That was about to say that. Also, if they ever want to do a Sister Act 3, I'm totally down for it. Put it on Netflix. Bring back Harvey Keitel. Put him in jail and a jail scene. Bring back Lauryn Hill out of the cave that she's in right now. I know she doesn't want to do stuff in the public eye, but goddamn, give me a Netflix Sister Act 3 reboot slash.
You do realize, Brian, that Disney Plus and Disney own Sister Act now, and they are actually rebooting it.
Oh my god! I didn't even know. Tis the season. Tis the season. I'm definitely getting Disney Plus now.
That might be the funniest thing you've ever said on this podcast. I don't really have a question about anything related to this movie, so let's just discuss our favorite Michael Bay movies for just a moment.
Okay, so I kind of mentioned it before, but I still think Transformers is an underrated comedy, and if you kind of strip it down to like the way that Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox are acting in that movie, especially with John Turturro, it's really entertaining. And I think if you kind of let your guard down, just for the first one, treat it as a comedy, I think you'll enjoy it. Especially the parents and the interaction between Shia LaBeouf and his parents, I thought was just hilarious. So that's just me. And then, there's Armageddon, right? And despite how crazy that movie is, but goddamn, it's fucking entertaining. And Steve Buscemi, I think, kicks ass in that movie as well. And Bruce Willis is kind of whatever. But Ben Affleck crying at the end is pretty entertaining. And yeah, I don't like Bad Boys, so I never saw Bad Boys 2, and I know I'm going to get a lot of shit for that. But yeah, yeah.
I mean, how do you not like Bad Boys? I mean, that's like the movie that even people who don't like Michael Bay, they like the first Bad Boys. The second Bad Boys is not very good. My two favorites, Bad Boys is up there. I would say my absolute favorite is The Rock because of Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage. It's just enough wackiness to be entertaining, but it's not quite full Michael Bay at that point, and there's a really nice balance. And I kind of miss Sean Connery on the big screen, which is so it's sad we never got like a definitive like last role for him. Instead, he just kind of petered out after the awful League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I am glad that neither one of us said Pearl Harbor because that movie is pretty awful, except for the Pearl Harbor sequence itself.
Yeah, I actually watched that on VHS, and it was, guess what, 2 VHSs in 2001.
I mean, Michael Bay was trying to make his Titanic. That's what he was going for, clearly.
Yeah, clearly, and it just missed the mark, obviously. And that a John Voight in a wheelchair, so there you go.
Yes, John Voight playing a Democrat, which might be the most unbelievable thing that has ever existed on film. Anyway, next week we are going to talk about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows. Things will get marginally better, maybe. We'll see. Brian, any final thoughts?
I I don't want to watch this movie ever again, man, because it was just ridiculous the second time around, like brutal almost. And thank God Johnny Knox. I swear to God, Johnny Knoxville is one of my least favorite actors. He's fine in Jackass stuff, but man, God, it really killed me with Leonardo here. Really killed me.
I like how that's what broke you. It's not there's a lot of things that can potentially break you, and I like how that's the one. For me, so much of it has to do with the way that April O'Neil's character is treated. It's just pretty awful. So we will talk to you again next week for more awfulness. For Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.
They blew up a car at the end for no reason at all, which was more than the budget of the original Ninja Turtles movie.